I only realized something was wrong when the elevator passed the 7th floor. It didn't make a sound, it didn't shake, it just kept going up, as if that were normal. The problem was that the hotel where I was staying only had 7 floors. This was written on the panel, in the room folder, and on the emergency floor plan behind the door. When the doors opened, I didn't see a new floor. I saw a corridor that was far too old, covered in a thick, untouched dust, as if no one had stepped there for decades. The walls seemed narrower, the air was heavy, and the silence. It wasn't silence. It was anticipation. At the end of the hallway, there was a woman standing perfectly still, as if she had been waiting for me since before I even arrived. And in that instant, I understood. I hadn't gone up one extra floor. I had entered a place that shouldn't exist. I ran back into the elevator. I pressed the ground floor button several times, feeling a strange tightening in my chest, as if the air were getting thinner. The doors closed, but they didn't go down immediately. For a few long seconds, the display flashed 8. Then finally, it began to descend. When I reached the lobby, the receptionist looked at me confused and asked if I was okay. She said I had stepped out of the elevator nearly 3 hours ago. I tried to explain, but I stopped mid-sentence when I saw something in the reflection of the reception glass. Behind me, on the clean marble floor, there was no shadow at all. And, in the elevator mirror, someone was still standing in the 8th floor corridor, looking straight at me. I wasn't looking for anything when I heard about the 8th floor. This is important to make clear. It wasn't a planned investigation, nor an urban legend that someone told me at a bar. I was staying there for a reason far too mundane to justify what came after. A 2-day conference, an old hotel, city center, reasonable price. 7 floors, the website said. 7 floors, the facade confirmed, 7 buttons in the elevator. It was only on the second night that something went off its axis. I was coming back late, around midnight. The lobby was empty, lights dimmed, that typical silence of a building that keeps functioning even when no one seems to be awake. I entered the elevator alone. I pressed the button for my floor, the 7th, and leaned against the mirror, checking messages on my phone. That was when I noticed the detail. The digital display above the door didn't show numbers. It showed a horizontal dash, as if it were thinking before deciding where to go. I didn't give it much thought. Old elevators do that. I was already used to minor glitches. But in the middle of the ascent, I felt the jolt. It wasn't a sudden stop. It was more like the cabin had overshot the expected point and then corrected the movement. A mistake too small to be scary, but big enough to be noticed. The doors opened. The corridor wasn't mine. The first thing I felt was the smell. Old dust, not construction dust, nor that of recent abandonment. Thick, stagnant dust, as if no one had breathed there for a very long time. The carpet was the same pattern as the other floors, but the color was faded in a strange way, as if it had been sucked out by the light over the years. The walls had doors, several of them, but no numbering, no signs, no emergency indications, just closed doors and a silence that didn't match a functioning hotel. My first thought was simple. I got the floor wrong. The second was more unsettling. There is no floor above the 7th. Before I could react, the elevator beeped behind me and the doors began to close on their own. Instinctively, I lunged forward and stuck my hand in the gap. The doors reopened reluctantly, as if that movement hadn't been intended. I stepped back inside the cabin. When the doors closed again and the elevator began to descend, the display showed 7. Everything normal, normal noise, normal time, but there was something wrong with me. My clothes were dirty. A fine powder covered the hem of my pants and the side of my shoe, dust I didn't remember stepping in. When I got to the room, I ran my finger over it and felt the texture. Dry, thick, ancient. It was that night that I heard, for the first time, a casual comment from a cleaning lady in the hallway the following morning. "Did you go up yesterday too, sir?" When I asked, "Up where?" she merely looked away and replied, "Some guests get the buttons confused. It happens." But I knew I hadn't confused anything, and it was there, even before fear existed, that an idea began to form. Slow, uncomfortable, impossible to ignore. Maybe the problem wasn't a floor that appears. Maybe it was a floor that waits. If you've ever stayed in a hotel or building where something didn't add up, leave a comment later. Not everything needs an immediate explanation. And if you followed along this far, it's worth subscribing so you don't miss the rest of this story. I spent the rest of that morning trying to convince myself that what I had lived through was just a mundane error. Elevators fail. Old hotels have poorly documented renovations. The human mind fills in gaps with ease. I've written about this myself before. But there is a fundamental difference between a common mistake and something that refuses to align with the most basic facts. After breakfast, I decided to do the most rational thing possible. Check the hotel records. I started with the obvious. I went down to the reception and struck up a conversation with the attendant, a middle-aged man, overly polite, with that automatic smile of someone who has already answered the same question dozens of times. "How many floors does the building have?" I asked, as if asking for the time. He didn't even hesitate. "7, sir." "Have there always been 7? His smile faltered for an almost imperceptible instant. It wasn't fear, it was an internal correction. "Since the hotel has existed," he replied. I then asked to see the evacuation map, that mandatory chart that usually sits behind the counter or near the elevator. He pointed to the wall next to us. There it was, a clear, organized floor plan, 7 numbered levels. No mention of an extra basement, no overlap, no blank space. Even so, something bothered me. I went back to the elevator and observed the buttons more closely. They were old, metallic, slightly worn. From the ground floor to the 7th, everything was normal, but the space above the 7 button seemed too polished, as if, at some point, another button had existed there and been removed with excessive care. I ran my finger over it. The surface was smoother than the rest of the panel. I went up to the 7th floor by the stairs this time, on purpose. I counted the flights. 7. Everything correct. The corridor was exactly what I remembered. Cold lighting, clean carpet, the smell of recent cleaning products. No sign of the thick dust from the night before. I walked to the end of the hallway and noticed something I hadn't seen before. The emergency stairs didn't end there. There was a fire door with a worn sign above it. The sign didn't say restricted access. It only said technical level. The doorknob was cold. I turned it slowly. The door didn't open, not because it was locked, but because it seemed blocked from the other side, as if something were pressing against it. A continuous, motionless weight. I didn't push hard. Something in my body told me that would be a mistake. I backed away. It was only then that I noticed another detail, small but impossible to ignore. The sound. The hotel was awake. Doors opening, distant footsteps, the elevator going up and down. But there, near that door, the sound seemed muffled, as if the air were thicker, as if the corridor ended sooner than it should. That night, I decided to check one last thing before giving up on the ghost floor idea. I asked the reception for a simple copy of my guest check-in record. When I went up to the room and analyzed it calmly, my stomach turned cold. In the room return time field, the electronic log marked 017, guest returned to the 8th floor. I stared at that for several minutes, waiting for my brain to find a logical explanation. It didn't find one, because it wasn't an isolated typing error. It was data saved in the system, and if the system registered it, then, somehow, that floor existed enough to be recognized. That was when I stopped trying to prove I was right. I started trying to understand why someone was pretending it wasn't happening. I waited until after midnight, not out of courage, but because I've learned over the years that certain things only manifest when the world slows down, when the building sleeps, when sounds become rare enough for any anomaly to stand out. At Zoo 011, the lobby was almost empty. A couple was dozing in armchairs near the entrance. The night attendant was typing something on the computer without looking up. The elevator was stopped, doors open, as if it were waiting. I entered. The panel lit up the familiar numbers: ground floor 1, 2, 3, 7. I took a deep breath. There was no button for the 8th floor. Even so, I pressed the 7. The doors closed with a sound slower than usual. The elevator began to rise, too smooth, almost without vibration. I mentally counted the seconds between floors, an old habit of someone who has spent too much time in problematic buildings. 1, 2, 3. At the time when it should have reached the 7th, the elevator didn't stop. It kept going up. The display didn't change. It remained showing 7, but the movement continued. It was at that moment that the air inside the cabin changed. It didn't get heavy. It got ancient. A dry smell like dust that was never touched again. I had the impression that my breathing was making more noise than it should. The elevator stopped. The doors opened. It wasn't the 7th floor. The corridor in front of me didn't match the rest of the hotel. The carpet was darker, thicker, covered by an irregular layer of gray dust, as if no one had passed through there in years. The walls had a yellowish, stained tone, and the lighting came from weak fixtures, some flickering with intervals too long to be a common electrical fault. The silence was absolute. No sound from other rooms, no air conditioning, no elevator. I stepped out of the cabin slowly, feeling the powder give way under my shoes. Each step left a clear mark on the floor, marks that didn't mix with any others. There were no footprints besides mine. I looked back. The elevator was still there, doors open, but the interior seemed distant, as if it were a few centimeters further away than it should be. The cabin light didn't fully reach the corridor. It was then that I noticed something that made me stop. The room doors, all of them were closed. No numbers on the plates, no identification, just smooth surfaces without visible doorknobs, as if they were never intended to open. I walked a few meters down the hallway. The dust increased as I moved forward, and the air grew colder. Not a comfortable cold. It was the kind of cold that seems to come from inside the body, not the environment. At the end of the corridor, something stood out from the monotony. A single door, different from the others. It had a doorknob, and next to it, etched directly into the wall with something that looked like it had been done with a fingernail or thin metal, was a crude drawing of a woman. Not a detailed portrait, just the outline, an elongated body, head slightly tilted, arms hanging down by the torso. The figure was incomplete. The feet didn't touch the ground, and in that instant, without any sound, without wind, without visible movement, I had the most uncomfortable certainty of the entire night. I hadn't been the first to arrive there, but I was one of the few who would return. I didn't touch the doorknob. That was the first rational decision I had made since I stepped out of the elevator. There was something about that door, not an explicit threat, but a silent certainty that crossing it would mean more than simply entering another room. I stepped back a few paces and did what I always do when I don't fully trust the reality around me. I took my phone out of my pocket. The camera opened normally. The screen illuminated the dusty corridor, the stained walls, the thick carpet marked only by my footprints. Everything seemed too coherent for something that shouldn't exist. I pointed the camera at the different door. On the screen, it appeared closed, ordinary. No symbol on the wall, no drawing of a woman, just a smooth door like the others. I lowered the phone and looked directly. The drawing was still there. I raised the device again. I pointed it at the wall next to the door. The symbol simply didn't exist in the recording. The camera captured only a dirty, peeling surface. I felt a shiver run up my arms. I took a photo, then another, then a short video. In none of the records did the drawing appear. But I was looking at it. It wasn't a play of light. It wasn't a shadow. It wasn't a peripheral illusion. It was a clear outline, deep enough to cast small irregularities on the wall. Something that should be captured by any common optical sensor. It was then that I heard the first sound since I arrived there. A light, dragging. It wasn't coming from behind the door. It was coming from the corridor, a few meters ahead, outside my immediate field of vision. I turned off my phone. The silence returned to being total. I moved forward slowly, trying to control my breathing. As I approached the point where the sound seemed to have come from, the dust on the floor changed pattern. Not like human footprints, they were long, continuous trails, as if something had been dragged slowly along the hallway, and they all led back to that door. When I turned to face it again, something was different. The drawing of the woman seemed more defined. Before, it was just a rudimentary outline. Now, the arms were longer, the head more tilted, and there was a new detail that hadn't been there before. The face, not complete, just a vague suggestion of deep eyes and a mouth too thin, drawn as a horizontal line. I had the clear, uncomfortable impression that this wasn't an ancient symbol. It was something in progress. It was at that moment that I understood why guests always describe the same corridor, the same dust, the same non-existent floor, but never the same woman with the same details. She doesn't reveal herself all at once. She learns. I felt an almost childish urge to call someone, to scream, to break the silence, but something inside me, maybe instinct, maybe fear, told me that any sound made there could serve as a reference, as if the place were waiting for me to react just to adjust the next version of her. I put my cell phone in my pocket. I took a step back, and at that exact instant, without any mechanical noise, without warning, the door with the doorknob opened on its own. Only a few centimeters, enough for me to see the absolute darkness on the other side, and to hear, very low, almost respectful, a breath that didn't match the rhythm of mine. The door didn't open more than that. It remained ajar, as if it were waiting for a conscious decision on my part. No creak, no old wood snap, nothing that would betray a mechanism. Just an opening far too clean for an abandoned building. I pushed it with 2 fingers. The room on the other side seemed, at first glance, mundane, small, no windows. A bed pushed against the right wall, a crooked nightstand, a wardrobe with one of the doors off its track. Everything was covered in the same thick dust as the corridor, but something was wrong from the very first step, the sound. When my foot touched the floor, the noise wasn't hollow like a common floor, nor was it soft like carpet. It was a muffled sound, far too deep, as if there were a much larger empty space just below the surface. I took another step. The floor responded with a slight delay. It didn't give way, it responded. The sensation was like stepping on something that absorbed weight and returned the pressure slowly, like a lung trying to adapt to a rhythm that wasn't its own. I knelt down and touched the floor with the palm of my hand. Cold, but not the cold of ceramic or concrete. It was an organic cold, damp, similar to a basement that never receives light, even when the surface appears dry. I ran my hand slowly. The dust scattered, revealing something unexpected. Small circular marks, almost imperceptible, as if the floor had been pressed repeatedly in the same spots. Kneeling, I brought my face closer. The marks formed a pattern, not geometric enough to be intentional, nor random enough to be accidental. They were spacings too regular for human steps, and too wide to be from someone my size. I stood up too quickly, feeling my stomach churn. That was when I noticed the detail that had escaped me until then. The bed didn't fully touch the floor. The feet were sinking a few centimeters into the floor as if they were partially buried. The nightstand, too. The wardrobe, being heavier, seemed to have sunk even further, leaning forward, and the floor around them seemed slightly elevated, as if the floor were molding itself to the weight of the objects, or as if it were learning to sustain them. I took 2 steps back. The sound came again, clearer this time, a dull snap coming from below. Not a wooden snap, an internal snap. Instinctively, I looked at the door. It had closed, not with force, not with violence. It was just closed now, as if it had never been opened. The feeling of confinement didn't come as immediate panic. It came as a late understanding. This room wasn't a place for passing through. It was a place for staying. I felt the floor vibrate almost imperceptibly under my feet in a slow, constant rhythm. It didn't seem like a structural tremor. It felt like something adjusting its own weight to mine. That was when I thought of the reports. No guest described the room in detail. They always spoke of the corridor, of the dust, of the non-existent floor. Because maybe whoever enters this room has no time or opportunity to observe anything else. I swallowed hard. If the woman of the phantom floor existed, that room wasn't where she appeared. It was where she finished forming, and I had the uncomfortable certainty that the floor under my feet already knew exactly where I was standing. The floor stopped vibrating the moment I thought of her. It wasn't abrupt. The vibration simply ceased, as if the thought had been perceived. I stood still for a few seconds, waiting for some sound, some physical sign to confirm I wasn't alone in that room. Nothing happened. The silence began to spread again, thick, almost tangible. That was when I noticed the dust. It was intact. The entire floor was covered in that thick, ancient layer that betrayed any movement easily. My footprints were visible, deep, clearly marked. But there was something wrong with their distribution. My marks went to the center of the room and stopped there. Not because I had stopped. I was still standing, breathing carefully, but because there was another area where the dust seemed compressed, with no footprints, as if something had been there for a long time, pressing down on the floor, but without ever moving. I knelt cautiously, ignoring the cold rising through my knees. The dust in that area was different. There was no typical foot drag, no heel, no toe, just a circular region, slightly sunken, like the outline of someone who stood in the same place for too long. I raised my eyes slowly, and then I saw her. There was no sudden appearance, no shadow crossing the field of vision. She was already there. She just hadn't been perceived before. The woman of the phantom floor was standing less than 2 meters from me, or partially standing. The upper part of her body was distinct. Narrow shoulders, arms too long for the torso, head slightly tilted forward, like someone observing something on the ground. The face, however, seemed out of focus, not blurred, but out of focus, like an image that the lens refuses to adjust. The dress she wore didn't move. It didn't react to the air. It didn't fold. It didn't ripple. It seemed made of the same material as the dust around it, as if it had been molded there and had never left that place. But what made me hold my breath was the most impossible detail. Her feet did not touch the floor. They were inside it, not sunken like the furniture, not pressing, simply passing through the floor, as if the surface were a membrane too thin to stop them. The dust around remained intact. No marks, no footprints. She didn't leave tracks because she never walked. She just was. I tried to take a step back. The floor responded with that subtle delay from before, as if it needed to decide whether it would allow the movement. My body swayed slightly, and for an instant, I had the clear sensation that the floor was calculating my weight. That was the moment the woman moved. She didn't walk. She glided a few centimeters forward without moving her legs, without shifting her torso. A continuous movement, too smooth to be human. The face tilted a bit more, and for the first time, I heard something that didn't come from the environment. A voice, but not through the air. She spoke through the floor. The vibration came through my feet, rose through my legs, crossed my stomach, and formed as sound inside my head. "You also felt it when the floor gave way," said the voice without emotion. It wasn't a question, it was a recognition. My mouth was too dry to answer. She glided a bit more. The space between us decreased without any noise. The dust remained motionless, as if nothing were happening there. "They always go up without realizing," she continued. "They think it's just another floor." I swallowed hard. The thought that I hadn't been the first, nor the 10th to be there, made the air even heavier. "Some try to run," she said. "Others scream, but the floor learns fast." My gaze involuntarily dropped to the floor. For a second, just one, I thought I saw something move under the surface. Not like a creature, but like a pressure reorganizing itself, as if the floor itself were adjusting to her presence. I looked back up. She was closer now, and even without being able to see her eyes, I was absolutely certain that she was smiling, not with her mouth, but with the space around her. I couldn't move immediately, not out of common fear, that impulse to flee, but because of something more primitive, the feeling that the floor was too attentive, as if any step would be interpreted, evaluated, responded to. The woman of the phantom floor did not advance. She also did not retreat. She remained there, partially fused to the floor, as if she were part of the architecture, a structural element that wasn't on the building plans. "It has already recognized you," said the voice, again without passing through the air. I looked around. The walls were the same. The low ceiling, covered in old cracks, seemed the same as before. But the space between the elements? No, something was different in the relationship between them. I took a cautious step to the side. The sound came late, not an echo, a real delay, as if the floor had decided to confirm the movement before allowing the noise to exist. My stomach tightened. "Don't run," she said. "When they run, it makes fewer mistakes." What scared me wasn't the sentence. It was the use of the word "it." "It who?" I managed to ask, feeling the vibration of my own voice rising through my legs. The woman tilted her head slightly. "The floor," she replied. "What is left of it?" The dust began to move, not like wind, not like physical displacement. It rearranged itself, forming soft lines on the floor, trajectories that did not correspond to human steps. I realized with a dry chill on the back of my neck that the floor was mapping. The lines crossed, erased themselves, reappeared at other points, like successive attempts to predict displacement. The floor didn't react to movements, it anticipated them. "In the beginning, it only observes," she continued. "Then, it begins to copy." My left foot sank a few millimeters. It was almost imperceptible, but enough for my entire body to go on alert. The floor didn't give way all at once. It gave way in stages, like someone testing resistance. I pulled my foot back. The floor took half a second to return to its original height. "It remembers," said the woman. "It remembers the weight, the rhythm, the hesitation." My heart was beating far too fast. "What happens to those who—" I started, but the sentence died before finishing. She glided a few centimeters to the side, positioning herself between me and the hallway door. There was no aggressive intent in the gesture. It was worse. It was functional. "Some go down," she said, "but not completely." I looked at the corridor behind her. For an instant, I swear the length seemed different. A bit longer, a bit deeper, as if the floor were expanding the space available to contain something it didn't yet know exactly what to do with. "The mistake is thinking this place was built," she continued. "It formed." "How?" I asked, almost in a whisper. She didn't answer immediately. Silence pressed back into the environment. I felt the minimal vibration under the soles of my feet, a slow, regular pulse, like a breath too deep to be heard. "When many people believe in the same floor," she said at last, "it stops being a lie." The realization came heavy. It wasn't a hidden floor. It wasn't an architectural error. It was an accumulation of reports, of steps, of expectations, a place that learned to exist because it was used too many times. The dust became motionless again. And then she said something that made me realize I had already gone too far. "Now it is learning you." I'm glad you're following along so far. Comment later if you prefer stories like this, quieter, psychological, or if you like it when horror reveals itself more directly. I read everything. If you're following along this far, tell me in the comments, do you believe that places can learn the people who pass through them? And where are you watching from, city or country? I was not alone on that floor. This perception didn't come as a shock, nor as a sudden revelation. It settled in gradually, like an uncomfortable truth that had always been there, waiting for me to have the courage to accept it. After the woman of the phantom floor said the floor was learning from me, I began to notice details that before seemed just dirt or abandonment. Marks on the floor, not complete footprints, fragments, a heel here, an irregular drag there, broken lines as if someone had tried to walk and given up mid-step. The dust was not homogeneous. There were areas where it seemed more compacted, almost polished, forming invisible corridors, trails of repeated use, paths that someone traveled many times before me. "Did they stay too?" I asked, not knowing exactly who I was speaking to. The woman didn't answer immediately. She moved away a few steps, gliding again without moving her feet, and pointed to one of the side doors in the hallway. The wood was swollen, covered in layers of old paint that peeled off like dead skin. The doorknob did not exist. In its place, there was only an oval depression, as if someone had pressed the metal from the inside until it gave up being an object. "Some tried to remember," she said. "Others tried to forget." I approached the door, feeling the air get heavier with every step. There was no smell of mold, nor of decomposition. It was another type of sensation, something close to hot dust, like the interior of a building closed for decades. I leaned my ear against the wood. I heard a low sound, not a clear voice. It was more like overlapping breaths out of sync. Small intervals, as if several people were trying to breathe in the same rhythm without succeeding. I pulled away in a sudden impulse. "Are they alive?" I asked. The woman tilted her head again, in that gesture that always seemed to indicate doubt. "Not in the way you understand," she replied. "They left, but they left enough parts so the floor would remember them." I began to understand. The floor didn't keep whole people. It kept functional fragments, the weight of the body, the pattern of fear, the hesitation before opening a door, the rhythm of breathing when someone realizes they shouldn't be there. "Every time someone goes up," she continued, "it compares." "With whom?" I asked. "With those who came before." The corridor seemed to lengthen again. The walls didn't move visibly, but the distance between points changed in a way the mind recognized, even without being able to measure it. Suddenly, I saw something that wasn't there before. A shoe, just one, covered in dust, turned on its side as if it had fallen during an interrupted run. It didn't look old. The lace was still intact. "This is recent," I murmured. "It always is," said the woman. I approached with care. When I reached out to touch the shoe, The floor vibrated slightly, not as a warning, but as a record, as if the floor were noting the gesture. I withdrew my hand immediately. "It doesn't like it when you try to take evidence," she added. "It prefers incomplete memories." I felt a shiver run up my arms. "And you?" I asked. "Did you try to leave?" She remained silent for too long. When she spoke, her voice seemed a little more distant, not in space, but in intent. "I went up thinking I was alone." The weight of that sentence fell slowly. I looked at the corridor once more. The marks on the floor, the doors without knobs, the solitary shoe. Everything there was not a set. It was an accumulation of attempts. And, for the first time since I entered that floor, I had a clear and disturbing certainty. I wasn't the first to stay too long, only maybe I was the first the floor was considering keeping whole. The elevator was exactly where I had left it. Doors open, cold light on the ceiling, the panel intact, with the buttons aligned in an almost reassuring way. No sign of electrical failure, no warning, no visible anomaly. Still, I knew something had changed. I entered slowly, feeling that hesitation the body develops when the mind has already perceived danger, but hasn't yet managed to explain it. I pressed the 7th floor button, the last officially existing one in the building. The button lit up. The doors began to close, and it was at that moment that I noticed the wrong detail. The reflection in the polished steel of the doors did not follow my movements with precision. It was subtle, an almost imperceptible delay, as if the image were being updated with a small interval. Not enough to cause immediate panic, just enough to generate suspicion. The doors closed completely. The elevator began to descend, or something like that. The movement wasn't continuous. There wasn't that slight initial jolt, nor the constant hum of the motor. Instead, I felt a succession of micro-adjustments, as if the elevator were correcting its own position every meter. The digital panel changed from 8 to 7, normal, but instead of stopping, it continued descending. 6. 5. My stomach sank. The building had 7 floors. I knew that. Everyone knew. It wasn't a matter of technical error. It was a structural rule. I pressed the emergency button. Nothing. The button sank under my finger, but there was no sound response, no light, no signal of activation. It was like pressing something that was no longer connected to any function. The elevator slowed down, stopped. The doors opened with a dry, too metallic sound for an old building. On the other side, it wasn't the ground floor. It was a corridor, identical to the phantom floor. Same thick dust, same pale walls, same lighting with no clear source. But there was something new there. The corridor was shorter. The doors were closer to each other, as if the space had been compressed. The sensation was that of looking at a poorly dimensioned version of the floor, like a copy made by someone who doesn't understand human proportions well. I took a step out. The elevator didn't disappear. It remained there behind me, open, silent. But when I looked at the internal panel, I saw something that made my heart race. The display no longer showed numbers. It showed a word: adjustment. The woman of the phantom floor was leaning against the hallway wall a few meters ahead. She didn't look surprised. "It doesn't like it when you go down carrying what you've learned," she said. "I just want to leave," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. She watched me for far too long. "Descending is not leaving," she corrected. "Descending is redistributing." I looked again at the elevator. I had the clear sensation that if I stepped in there at that moment, I wouldn't come out in the same place, nor in the same way. As if the journey now included an invisible stage, something between the starting point and the destination. "And if I refuse?" I asked. The woman tilted her head. "Then you stay where the building can measure you best." The elevator began to emit a low, rhythmic sound. Not an alarm, a mechanical invitation. I realized with a dry cold in my chest that the building wasn't trying to trap me. It was trying to decide where I belonged, and the elevator was just the instrument of that choice. I didn't enter the elevator, not out of courage, but out of a raw, almost animal intuition that crossing those doors would mean accepting a version of myself that I didn't yet know. The woman of the phantom floor observed my decision without judgment. There was no rush in her. Buildings that wait do not need to persuade. I stepped away a few paces from the elevator. The moment I did, the rhythmic sound ceased. The doors closed on their own, slowly, without the final ding. When I tried to call the elevator again, pressing the button beside the door, nothing happened. The panel didn't light up. The button didn't sync. It was as if the elevator had ceased to exist at that specific point in the building. It was then that the corridor began to react. The thick dust on the floor, that layer that never seemed to be disturbed, began to show marks. Not new footprints, but old tracks reappearing, as if the powder were revealing paths already made before. Trails that went back and forth, crossing each other, interrupted abruptly before closed doors. Some trails stopped before doors I didn't remember seeing before. Others simply ended in the middle of the hallway. "They always try to remember later," said the woman, walking slowly. Her steps left no mark. "But the building doesn't forget first." I asked what she meant by that. She touched the wall beside her, scattering the dust with her fingers. Under the thick layer, there were height marks, scratches made on the wall, like someone measuring growth over the years. Only they weren't marks of a single person. There were dozens, hundreds. Some started and stopped abruptly, as if life had been interrupted in the middle of the record. "These were not guests," she explained. "They were adjustments." I started to feel something strange in my head. Not pain, pressure. Like when a memory tries to emerge and doesn't find enough space. Disconnected images began to form. Me in the lobby, signing something I didn't remember. Me talking to the doorman about a floor that didn't appear in the ads. Me pressing a button that shouldn't exist. "I've been here before," I murmured. The woman nodded. "Everyone who reaches the 8th has already been here. That's how the building tests compatibility." The corridor seemed narrower now, not physically, but perceptually. The feeling was that the space was watching me, adjusting itself to my presence, comparing me with previous memories. The doors began to emit subtle sounds, not knocks, internal breaths like wood expanding and contracting. Some doorknobs turned slightly, on their own, as if they recognized my proximity. "It knows who you are," she said, "and it knows who you can be if you stay." I tried to think rationally, but it was hard to ignore the sensation that each wall contained fragments of people who passed through there, not as ghosts, but as residual data. The building didn't haunt, it stored, and somehow I had left things of mine there before, memories that didn't come back with me. "What happens to those who don't go down?" I asked. The woman took a long time to answer. "They continue being remembered." That was when I heard something behind me, a low sound, far too familiar. My name, not coming from a mouth, not coming from a specific door, but from the corridor itself, echoing with subtle variations, as if the building were testing different intonations until it found the correct one. My name didn't sound like a call, it sounded like a confirmation, and in that instant, I understood something that chilled me to the bone. It didn't matter if I accepted or refused the elevator. The building had already decided that I was part of its memory. The corridor didn't end. Not in the physical sense. There was, indeed, a wall at the end, a door without a number, and an unlit fixture above it. But the sensation was one of continuity, as if the space were merely taking a pause, not reaching a definitive end. The woman of the phantom floor stopped a few meters from the door. "From here on, the building prefers silence," she said in an almost respectful tone. I observed the door closely. Unlike the others, there was no dust accumulated in front of it. The floor was clean, smooth, as if no one had walked there recently, or as if the floor had been prepared. "This room," I began to ask. "It is not a room," she interrupted. "It is a point of permanence." I touched the doorknob. It was warm, an absurd detail considering the rest of the floor. The metal seemed to maintain its own temperature, slightly above the environment, like living skin. When I turned the knob, I didn't hear the normal click of a lock. The sound was muffled, internal, like something giving way from within. The door opened. The space beyond didn't correspond to any possible floor plan of the building. It was too big. The first thing I felt was the smell. Old dust mixed with something metallic, almost like the odor left by overheated electronic devices. The lighting came from nowhere specific. There were no visible lamps, but the environment was clear enough to reveal too many details. There was furniture, all different: an old iron bed, a modern armchair, a school desk, a sofa that I recognized, identical to the one in my living room. Each piece seemed taken from different times and places, placed there with no aesthetic concern, only functional, as if the space had been assembled with scraps of lives. On the walls, empty frames, mirrors covered by fabric, and in a corner, a smaller door, closed, with a rusty plate hanging by a single screw. There was no number, there was no name, but, strangely, I knew what that door was. "That's where they stop coming back," said the woman staying outside. She didn't enter. "Not because they die, but because they stop needing to go down." The pressure in my head returned, more intense. Fragments of memory began to align with uncomfortable clarity. Me sitting at that desk, me lying on that bed, me looking at that mirror before it was covered. "I've been here," I said with certainty. She nodded. "All who recognize the room have been here." I approached the smaller door. As I moved forward, I felt something reorganizing inside me, not emotion, function, as if a part of my body were being silently repositioned to better fit that space. I rested my hand on the door. From the other side, I heard a low sound. Breath. But it didn't come in a human rhythm. It was irregular, adjusted, like someone testing new lungs. "What happens if I open it?" I asked, without looking at her. The answer was slow. "The building stops calling you by name," she said, "and starts using you." I pulled my hand away. At that instant, something changed. Not in the room, in me, a heavy certainty formed, too clear to be ignored. That space didn't exist to imprison me. It existed to complete me, to organize what had been fragmented from the moment someone, at some time, decided that certain places should not be forgotten. I looked back. The woman of the phantom floor looked different now, sharper, less human. "You don't have to decide today," she said, "but the building has already recorded your presence." I left the room. When I crossed the door back into the corridor, I felt the weight of the choice not made settle in like a second shadow. The door closed on its own behind me, and the instant that happened, I realized something that made me freeze. The corridor was shorter, as if the building had already decided that space would no longer need to be so large for me. I pressed the elevator button knowing that it no longer meant going down. The panel still showed only numbers up to the 7th floor. No failure, no flashing light, no indication of error. Still, when the doors closed, I had the unmistakable sensation that something had remained outside and something had entered with me. The elevator began to descend. The movement was too smooth, no jolts, no mechanical noises, the kind of displacement that doesn't require friction, as if the cabin were being repositioned, not transported. I looked into the internal mirror. My reflection was normal, tired, dark circles. But there was a detail that deeply disturbed me. My shadow did not appear on the cabin floor. The lighting was correct, coming from above, but there was no projection at all below my feet. The digital display passed from 8 to 7. Nothing happened. The elevator kept descending. The time between floors seemed irregular, sometimes too fast, sometimes too long, as if it were hesitating. When it reached the ground floor, I heard the familiar ding. The doors opened. Lobby, people, voices, life. I stepped out of the elevator with my heart racing, trying to convince myself that it was over. I walked to the reception, asked for a glass of water, spoke briefly with the employee. Everything seemed too normal, exaggerated normality, like a set that makes a point of appearing functional. It was only when I went through the revolving door to the street that I realized something was wrong. The sensation was one of delay, as if my movements were arriving before or after myself. I walked a few meters, stopped before the reflection of a shop window, and observed closely. My body moved normally, my image too, but for a fraction of a second, before each gesture, I saw a micro-adjustment in the reflection, as if another version of me were anticipating the movement, correcting posture, aligning the angle, like a rehearsal. I went back to the hotel that same night. I didn't go up. I stayed in the lobby for hours, observing the flow of guests. Some entered the elevator, others left. At a certain point, I saw something that made me hold my breath. A man came out of the elevator with a vacant expression, eyes far too fixed. He walked to the door, stopped, and went back, without speaking to anyone. He entered the elevator again. The display marked 7, but before the doors closed, I clearly saw button 8 light up, on its own, for less than a second. That night, while reviewing the recordings, I found a detail I didn't remember registering. A short audio clip, captured after the elevator had already stopped at the ground floor. A female voice, low, almost affectionate, saying, "He still comes back? They always come back once?" I didn't recognize the voice, but I recognized the tone. It was the same as the woman of the phantom floor. That was when I understood. Descending does not mean leaving. It only means postponing the stay. The 8th floor isn't above the 7th. It is after. If you had found this room, would you have opened the last door? Comment there, and take the opportunity to say if you prefer more psychological or more supernatural stories. Do you believe that some places continue to exist even after we leave them? If so, comment, and say what city or country you're watching from. I don't remember making the last recording. That's the most important detail. I don't remember turning on the camera. I don't remember choosing the framing. I don't remember pressing record, but the file exists. It appeared 3 days later in a small form almost abandoned, dedicated to reports of impossible architecture. No recognizable username, no description, just a title too generic to attract attention. Hotel, unedited recording. The video is exactly 47 seconds long. There is no introduction, no cuts, no soundtrack. The image shows a narrow corridor, poorly lit, covered by a thick layer of gray dust. The walls are the same as the hotel's. The texture, the color, the arrangement of the doors. But the corridor does not exist. The camera is still, resting on something low, as if it had been placed on the floor or on a suitcase. The image shakes slightly, not from movement, but as if the air were too heavy to remain stable. In the center of the frame is me, or something using my body. I am standing motionless, looking directly into the lens. My clothes are the same as the night I came down from the elevator. My face is normal, no injuries, no evident deformation, but there is a clear absence. There is no shadow behind me. The corridor lighting comes from above, tilted, exactly like on the other floors. The doors cast long shadows. The irregularities of the wall create dark outlines. I do not. In the first few seconds, I stand completely still. Then, something changes. My eyes move, not to the sides, not down, but slightly back, as if they were following something that is not in front of the camera. And then, for the first time, a female voice speaks. Off frame, low, controlled, unhurried. Now he understands. The camera does not move. I do not answer, but my lips move. The audio fails exactly at that point. The sound wave distorts always in the same stretch, as if the file itself refuses that specific sequence of sounds. It is not censorship. It is not common digital noise. It is a structural interruption, as if the name, the true name, could not be recorded in that format. Only one syllable escapes. Always the same. Always incomplete. In the final seconds of the video, something appears on the wall behind me. Symbols, not like those in grimoires, not identical to manuscripts. They are deformed, unstable versions, as if they had been redrawn from memory. Fragments of Belial, distortions of Bune, traces of Baal, echoes of Vasago. None complete, none pure. The image slowly darkens. Before the video ends, a phrase appears handwritten directly on the wall, as if it had been scratched with something hard. It has a body now. The file corrupts immediately after. Invalid checksum. Metadata missing. No traceable origin. The video cannot be copied correctly. Every attempt generates different failures. But the most disturbing part is not that. It's that, since the posting of this video, comments have started to emerge from people saying the same thing, that they dreamed of a corridor covered in dust, that they entered an elevator that didn't stop where it should, that they heard a woman ask to wait just one more floor. And they all describe the same final detail. When they wake up, they have the clear feeling that someone has already been there before them, as if the space had been prepared, as if the floor no longer needed an entire building, just someone willing to go up. There are files that should never be opened and floors that don't appear on any map. Have you ever witnessed something that logic tried to erase from your memory? Comment which city you're watching from and subscribe so you don't miss the next entry in the Black Archive. The building already knows you're here. Which place do you think shouldn't exist but exists anyway? Comment. Maybe it'll be the next one.